Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Patriots Day at the Lexington Historical Society. I think most of our guests have arrived, so we are going to get started. And thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Sarah McDonough, and I am the programs manager here at the Lexington Historical Society. We have a great program for you today. We're running Patriots Day programming all week. We've already had a few that we're hoping to put online for you to watch if you haven't managed to see them yet. And so we'll have programming running from this morning all the way through Friday. So this particular program is something that we do every single year for Patriots Day. It is called First Shot, and it features our First Shot film, which is a short documentary that we produced here in Lexington that describes the Battle of Lexington, why we got to where we were in April of 1775, what exactly happened for those people, especially on reenactment days, who are several folks deep out in the Battle Green viewing area. So you'll get a chance to see some of the action a little bit more up close. And then after that, we will have a Q&A discussion with some of our reenactor friends, who some of whom were in the film. So if anyone has questions about what that was like, we can have folks answer that. And then as well, these are some of the most knowledgeable folks that you will possibly meet about the history of the American Revolution. So while you're watching the film, if you have any questions about what happened on April 19th, 1775, if you have questions about what it's like to actually be in a mock battle or just to be a reenactor in general, you can put those questions at any time in the Q&A box, which should be at the bottom of your screen. If for any reason that doesn't work for you, you can also leave that in the chat box on the side of your screen as well. And then to round off the program, as some of you may know, Lexington Historical Society is very grateful to have its own colonial singing group, the Lexington Historical Society Colonial Singers, which is run by Diane Taraz, who is also here with us this morning. So if you have any questions about colonial music, she can also answer those. And she will be doing a performance for us as well at the end of the program. So before we formally get started, I'd just like to give a general shout out to the Historical Society. As I mentioned at the beginning, we are doing programs all day. So if you are interested in going to our website at any point, lexingtonhistory.org, and I will put that down in the chat window here. Do go there at any point over the course of the week. We have events calendars in multiple formats so that you never miss anything. And then we also have on our website an area where you can donate if you would like. All of the programs that we're running this week are free, but of course we would love if anyone is able to make any of these a pay what you can program. This will allow us to keep doing these programs for as long as possible, including the virtual ones. So it is not necessary, but if anyone would like to give any small donation to the Historical Society, we would really appreciate it. So without further ado, I am going to begin our first shot film, which is about 15 minutes long, and then we will get along to the Q&A. I'll have the reenactors introduce themselves, and we can start answering your questions. All right, I'm just gonna pull up this video here.
The midnight hour is quiet in the home of Lexington minister Jonas Clark. Until the stillness is broken by a rider who appears out of the darkness.
Who's there? Revere, from Boston. The family's retired and don't want to be disturbed by any noise.
Noise? You'll have noise enough before long. The regulars are out.
The house comes alive with activity. Two prominent guests, Patriot leaders Samuel Adams and John Hancock, are apprised of the news.
The regulars are out at Fort. They're being rowed across.
As they consult with Clark and Revere, they are joined by William Dawes,
Welcome. Hi, I bring news from Joseph Warren.
another express rider who is alarming the countryside. Within minutes, the bell on Lexington Common calls out the town militia. The day is April 19th, 1775. The war for independence is about to begin. Why it should commence on this day, in this place, is a story more than a dozen years in the making.
What do we mean by the American Revolution? The revolution was effected before the war commenced. The revolution was in the minds and hearts of the people. This radical change was the real American Revolution.
In 1759, Lexington farmer and wheelwright John Parker returns home after serving alongside the King's troops in the French and Indian War. He and thousands of other colonial volunteers return as loyal subjects, confident they have secured a safe and prosperous future under the British Crown. But in the conflict they have helped to win are sown the seeds of the revolution that will follow. The French and Indian War so drains Britain's treasury that King George and his ministers decide to raise money by taxing the colonies. British soldiers are defending America's frontier, they reason. The colonists ought to help pay the bill. In 1765, Parliament passes the Stamp Act, the first of several laws imposing taxes on the American colonies. To Britain's dismay, angry colonials protest that taxation without representation strips them of their rights. In Lexington, Minister Jonas Clark captures the town's outrage with a resolution condemning the Stamp Act.
That the world may see and future generations know that the present both knew and valued the rights they enjoyed and did not tamely resign them for chains and slavery.
In the years that follow, the citizens of Lexington watch as events unfold in Boston that will rock the colonies. The Stamp Act riots, the Boston Massacre, the Boston Tea Party. But Lexington does more than just watch. The town becomes a stronghold of colonial dissent. In August of 1769, 45 women bring their spinning wheels to a house right on the common to hold a spinning bee. It is a form of public protest. To show their support for a colonial boycott on British products, they are turning out homespun as an alternative to imported British cloth. Many of the wheels have been made by John Parker, who has seen a sharp increase in spinning wheel orders from women eager to support the Patriot cause.
Have your tea. Hey,
On December 13th, 1773, 3 days before the Boston Tea Party, the citizens of Lexington burn their tea in a common bonfire. A town passes a stirring resolution written by Jonas Clark, who has emerged as a powerful voice on behalf of the American cause.
If any person from this time forward purchase or consume any tea, such person shall be looked upon as an enemy to this town and to this country. Should the state of our affairs require it, we shall be ready to sacrifice our estates and everything dear in life, yea, and life itself, in support of the common cause.
In support of the common cause!
3 days later comes the Boston Tea Party. Parliament responds by closing the port of Boston in 1774. The closure is enforced by 3,000 British soldiers who, through no fault of their own, find themselves targets of intense hostility.
We were in imminent danger every evening of being insulted by the inhabitants. The worst of language was continually in our ears. Jeremy Lister, 10th Regiment of Foot.
Across the colonies, in taverns like John Buckman's in Lexington, men debate the latest developments. Sitting by the fire in one country tavern, John Adams overhears just such a discussion.
As I believed I was unknown to all of them, I sat in total silence to hear them. One said, "What would you say if a fellow should come to your house to tell you that he was come to make a list of all your cattle, that Parliament might tax you for them at so much a head?" "What would I say?" replied another. "I would knock him on the head." Well, if Parliament can take away Mr. Hancock's wharf and Mr. Rowe's wharf, they can take away your barn and my house. After much more reasoning in this style, a farmer, who had as yet been silent, broke out.
I think it's high time we rebel.
Patriot leaders form a provincial congress that calls on Massachusetts towns to ready their militia. Lexington appoints John Parker, captain of its militia company. 3 days after Christmas of 1774, a special town meeting convenes in Buckman Tavern to approve emergency expenditures for the militia.
Our militia need bayonets.
Yeah. But what of the cost?
We need the means to resist.
We do.
Gentlemen, we have a resolution before us. Resolved that bayonets be provided at the town's cost for 1/3 part of the training soldiers in this town. Let us have the
Acts of colonial defiance such as this are reported to General Thomas Gage, commander of the British troops in Boston, who sends a prophetic warning to London.
This province and the neighboring ones are preparing for war. If you think 10,000 men sufficient, send 20. If 1 million pounds is thought enough, give 2. You save both blood and treasure in the end. General Thomas Gage.
Gage sends out several expeditions to seize colonial munitions, with mixed results. When orders from London demand even more aggressive action, he reluctantly launches another mission in April of 1775. This one will change history. On the night of April 18th, Gage dispatches an elite force of grenadiers and light infantry, more than 700 men, to seize colonial artillery and ammunition hidden in Concord. Their route will take them through Lexington. For more than a decade, the town has simmered with increasing anger. Once loyal subjects, the people of Lexington are now fully aroused. This is the place the war will begin.
Fix, bed up.
Near dawn on April 19th, the king's troops approach the town.
Shoulder, arms.
They seek no fight here. But to their surprise, some 80 Lexington militiamen are drawn up on the common. Parkers and Monroes, Harringtons and Muzzies. Men determined to take a stand.
Steady, lads. Steady, lads. Steady, lads.
5 companies at the head of the British column deploy to meet the threat.
Steady, I said, damn you!
Major John Pitcairn orders the militia to disperse. The Lexington men are badly outnumbered, and at Captain Parker's direction, some begin to move off. Accounts vary widely as to what happened next. The only thing both sides agree on is that somebody fired a shot.
Dead upon the ground. 10 were wounded. The rest of the company, through divine goodness, were to a miracle preserved, unhurt in this murderous action.
Three cheers for His Majesty King George! Hip hip! Huzzah! Hip hip! Huzzah! Hip hip! Huzzah!
The regulars reach Concord by mid-morning. After a skirmish at North Bridge, they begin to fall back. Militia from more than 30 towns converge on the Redcoats, including the men of Lexington. Despite the grievous losses suffered at dawn, they grimly resolve to rejoin the fight and lay a deadly ambush for retreating British. By the time they make it back to Lexington, the British are on the verge of collapse. They are saved by a column of reinforcements led by Earl Percy.
Yes, let's go. Sergeant Wolfe, give me 5 minutes, then come.
While the combined forces regroup, the regulars use Monroe Tavern as a field hospital to tend to their growing number of wounded.
I received a shot through my right elbow joint. At Lexington, I got Mr. Symes, surgeon's mate to the 43rd Regiment, to examine my arm when he extracted the ball, it having gone through the bone and lodged within the skin. Ensign Jeremy Lister.
The beleaguered British march out of town in mid-afternoon. A fierce battle continues all along the road back to Boston. Over the course of the day, 49 colonials and 73 British soldiers lose their lives. Nothing will ever be the same.
The Battle of Lexington on the 19th of April changed the instruments of warfare from the pen to the sword. A few days after this event, I rode to Lexington and along the scene of action for many miles and inquired of the inhabitants about the circumstances. These were not calculated to diminish my ardor in the cause. They, on the contrary, convinced me that the die was cast, the Rubicon passed. If we did not defend ourselves, they would kill us.
Well, thank you for watching, everyone. We're very proud of this particular film because it was made, as I said, locally, except for John Adams, who may be a little bit of an overactor, but he was a professional. Every single person in that movie was a historical society employee or member or a local reenactor. So it's something that we are very proud of. So without further ado, I am going to take myself out of the spotlight and we can have our reenactors introduce themselves. So why don't we go down the line here, starting with Bill, And while these folks are explaining their roles in all of this to you, you can start thinking of some questions and then dropping them down in the Q&A. So why doesn't everyone begin by stating their name and what their reenactor persona is, if you have one?
My name is Bill Poole. I'm a member of the Lexington Minuteman Company. I portray Ebenezer Locke, who was my 6th great grandfather, who was here at the Battle of Lexington.
Okay, I'll go next. My name's Paul O'Shaughnessy. For a number of years, I portrayed sort of two people. I started off as Major Pitcairn on the green, berating the militia for their presence there and ordering them to disperse. And then by the end, when Colonel Smith arrived, I would sort of morph into him. So these days I play a British officer on the green, expressing his outrage at these simply intolerable Yankees who they're troublemakers, all of them.
My name is, I guess I'll go next. I don't know if I'm being seen or not. Am I being heard?
Yes, you are.
Okay, okay. My name is Barry Cuna. I've been a member of the Minutemen Company since 1991. I'm actually the past captain is Bill Poole, and also the president of the Lexington Historical Society now. I've actually played two roles, not at the same time like Paul did, though. My first character was Francis Brown, who was a sergeant in Captain Parker's army that was our militia that was wounded in the afternoon, took a bullet went through the cheek and lodged in the back of his neck that had it removed about a year later. Currently, I portray Lieutenant William Tidd, second in command to Captain Parker, who shouted that famous line when the British demanded that they disperse. He defiantly said, "You will not get my gun." And it's been my honor to be a member of this company for such a long time.
I'll go next. I'm Sarah Vadrani, former light infantryman, currently camp follower with His Majesty's 10th Regiment of Foot, also independent researcher, historian, all-around nerd. I normally portray a soldier's wife, so I talk a lot more about the women who were waiting back in Boston for their soldier husbands to come back, whether or not they were, what was going on, and just try to bring that civilian aspect of the story to life.
Okay.
I guess I can jump in. Sorry, I think I've got some lag going on here. Can anyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I wear multiple caps, as it were. I'm a guide for the Lexington Historical Society at the Hancock Clark House and the Monroe Tavern. I also portray occasionally an officer's wife, being married to Colonel O'Shaughnessy. On Patriots Day, I'm often just crowd control, answering questions. So if you've seen me out there, that's usually what I'm doing, asking you not to come under the ropes. But just praying for happier times next year.
And I am, can go next, I guess. Do I get sent to? Can I go next?
Yep.
Okay. I am Diane Therese. I direct the Lexington Historical Society Colonial Singers. And I don't have a specific reenactor persona, but I represent the women of the Revolution. I love bringing their perspective and songs that talk about their role and what they were thinking and feeling to the table, because they were generally not part of the official record and generally neglected. So, and I'm very sad I can't have the rest of the singers here with me today. Perhaps they're watching at home and they can sing along, but I'll be happy to do some songs in a little bit.
Wonderful. Okay. So without further ado, let's get to some questions. And we have a few that it looks like will elicit some good discussion here. If anyone is interested in jumping in, Our first one, for anyone who has an opinion on this, is who do you think fired the first shot?
I'll take that one. They did.
And I will reply to that, of course. They did.
I will
Yeah,
often see people on
certainly.
tours that
I don't
everyone
know.
interviewed blamed the other side, as is expected.
Actually, I think it was neither. I think somebody that was off the green took a pot shot. And then we don't know who it is because suddenly all these people are dead. He's not going to run out and go, hey, I did that. I blame Sam Adams.
We have discussed this. I'm not showing up, I guess, but we have discussed this for well, since the battle, and we've never really been able to come up with the correct, what I would say, an answer that satisfies everyone. We really don't know, and as Paul suggested, it could have been someone off the common. It could have been an accidental discharge. We, however, take the onus during the reenactment each year, and we fire a shot from the attic window of Buckman's Tavern, which begins the battle.
Perfect.
Okay.
All right. So our next question here is something that might get into territory outside of Lexington, but would be interesting discussion. We know that Paul Revere warned the militia, but did anyone else warn the Minutemen?
I'll take that. The militia was divided into groups, a portion of which was the Minutemen. About a third of each company was comprised the Minutemen, and they were to be ready at a minute's notice and so forth. And they usually comprised the younger and more active members of the militia. The other members of the militia were called the alarm group, and that meant that they came out only upon an alarm such as a fire in town or something exceedingly problematical. But both groups would have rallied on that day. Lexington, however, did not have a minute company. They never got around to doing that. And even though we call ourselves the Lexington Minutemen, I guess that's to give ourselves a better reputation. However, we really were just the Lexington Militia, or the Lexington Training Band, as they were known.
Right, so this is a good question, perhaps for Sarah. Do you make your own costumes?
Yes and no. It is a time-consuming hobby, so yes, most of what I think most of what all of us wear, we make or have somebody else make. Some things you find that somebody else does it better, and so you support another craftsperson. I actually make regimental coats, so the red coats, so all those really nice bright red coats that are out on Lexington Green normally. I've made a couple of those so far. So if they fall apart, it's on me. I think one of the really beautiful things about doing living history is it gives you a chance to get a very intimate feel for what these people went through day to day, and producing and wearing this clothing is one of the ways that you do that. So you get a chance to see how people moved and carried themselves and went about their day in everything that they were wearing, and really making it yourself brings a whole extra level to that. So there are certainly things that we purchase, like glasses, obviously, things like that, and certain things that I don't have the patience to make myself. But yes, most of what I'm wearing is made by me and worn very, very well. So time to make some new stuff.
A number of years ago, I took a workshop at the National in Concord on making a gown, and it was interesting. They had some some gowns from the time, and they showed us the beautiful outsides where they had lavished care and attention, and then the insides were so messy the stitches were all over the place and there were blood stains and it was everywhere. And they said, time is money, when people aren't going to see the inside or it's going to be adapted many times. Faster, faster. They tried to get us to work in the same way. I found that very interesting.
Definitely.
And I learned that your own saliva will take out your own blood on fabric in case you ever.
We literally put blood, sweat, and tears.
Continually prick myself all the time, and that's one thing I learned. Quick, get some of your own spit on it, your own enzymes. It's not good to know. Go forth.
We've all learned so much this morning already. I think this is a more battle-related question, considering that we had a couple thousand British soldiers by the end of the day and many more Americans. Why weren't there more casualties?
I'll try that one. The muskets are notoriously inaccurate. Remember, these are smoothbore guns. They knew entirely how to make rifles. They knew all of the physics of rifles, but muskets were much easier to maintain, to build, and all. So these are essentially at least on the British side, these are 75 caliber bore, smooth barreled guns, and the ball are not particularly aerodynamic. They're just round balls, usually with a spool at one end where the mold was snipped off, where the lead was snipped off. And so these things, it's like, they're basically, the balls are moving through the air very much like a curveball in baseball. They don't necessarily go where they're aimed. And so of the many, there were I forget, there were just like, I don't know, many tens of thousands of shots fired that day. At least there were receipts put in for that later. And I think it simply accounts that a great many times when these things were fired, you just didn't hit what you were aiming at. Seems amazing to us today, but that's the reality of it.
Yeah, there are a couple of other points too as well, is that we sometimes depict the regulars as marching in these straight columns and so forth and just waiting for people to shoot at them, but they were very, very good at defending themselves. And since the effective range of a musket was at the very most 100 feet or so, 100 yards, the regulars would send out flanking columns, and they would try to keep the opposition the effective distance away from the column, so that most of the colonial shots were going to be at long range. And when they were close up, they put themselves in danger of being flanked by these flanking columns and killed. And that's how a lot of the casualties came about on the part of the colonials or the provincials.
Yeah, not to belabor it, the single answer too much, but yes, I think one of the miracles of the day, or one of the untold stories of the day, is that the British actually do a reasonable job of defending themselves against rather overwhelming odds. And of course, they're reinforced partway through the day. And when they are reinforced, they get cannon. And that helps their situation quite a lot. And so what Bill is saying is from Concord on down to Lexington and through Lexington, you're talking about relatively open fields and flanking parties keeping the militia at least, perhaps a good 100 yards or more away from the road. That begins to deteriorate as you get down into Menotomy, or today's Arlington, and the houses start to close in on the road, and the fighting becomes much more personal and savage.
One other thing too as well is that most of these British soldiers were not combat experienced. And their officers were saying and quoted that they just were throwing away their shots because they were undisciplined as far as fire maintenance was concerned. So there were two inexperienced groups of individuals firing at each other.
Right.
Some were pretty good shots, but so you can see that if they were kept at 100 yards away, it's only when they get to close distance that it becomes more effective.
Right. Yeah, muskets were short-range weapons at the time. The bayonet was actually considered to be the offensive weapon of the day, still even in 1775. Okay, I hope that answers.
Yes, and I think that's also a good sort of seg into our next question. We have had a few folks ask about this, but I'm not sure if everyone has seen your answer, Paul. Some folks are curious what the logistics are of actually doing one of these reenactments. Someone mentioned that it looks like we didn't actually film on the green for the movie because of the modern houses and such, but there's also a lot of safety regulations that we have to keep in mind when we're doing this in terms of gunpowder and using the bayonet, doing lots of rehearsals. Can anyone speak to that?
I'll start off. The green reenactment is choreographed mayhem. It looks like everybody is just running around with bayonets, shooting at short range and such. But in fact, we rehearse it a number of times. The British have a rule of staying in a lane so that they're not crossing over in front of each other. We are in fact firing real guns with real bayonets. They're not made out of rubber, they're made out of steel. There is even a bayoneting that goes on, and that's choreographed and rehearsed.
And a burger on a doorstep at very close range. So.
Yes, that's too, exactly. And we have people like my wife Diane, who makes sure that people don't slip under the rope and get too close, and keeps them entertained and off to the side so that we can operate and do these things. And the militia are really good at sort of dealing with all of this. I mean, it must be rather scary from your end, but there's black powder, there's training. One thing I really should point out is that on both sides, people train and work at this. They don't just show up on the morning and see what happens. These are really actually trained soldiers that know their kit, know their weapons, know how to do everything. And so this all contributes to doing this safely with the appearance of great danger.
Yeah, I want to add and add to what Paul said is that the one thing that we stress at every single meeting and every single time we get together is safety. People said, well, you don't shoot balls, but they don't realize that the flames of these muskets shoot out about 30 feet. So there's always that danger. And like Paul said about the choreographed, we have very strict rules about not firing next to somebody else, making sure there's nobody in the line of fire. On the green, we never fire over the body of one of the deceased. And then we have very, very strict drills that we go by, and that we have to have a certain number of drills in order to get the permission to be on the green that day. And so, again, the stress is always on safety, and that is the most important part of what we drill every time.
From the point of view of being a colonial and being charged by British bayonets, we take this very seriously, and we feel it emotionally. When the British charge bayonets and scream, you can feel it in your stomach that what these people have gone through at that time and what it must have felt like, because we're experiencing some of that in this very day.
Great. All right. So we've had a couple of questions here that people are curious. Why couldn't the British just let it go? We're all British. What is their deal? Why did they come all the way over here? Which might be a bit of a long answer, but if anyone can figure that out succinctly, I would be interested in the elevator speech.
I'll take a little charge of it, a little bit. Of course, we were British colonies, and the British troops were here frequently to protect us from the French, and they had troops stationed here, not as many as would be just before the Revolution, but the colonies were to serve the mother country.
Something you
everything that was produced here was to go to the mother country. all the profits and so forth had to be on British ships and such. We were at the service of the mother country, and the restrictions that they placed upon us were to stop us from having any commerce with anyone else, particularly the French and the Spanish. It was much cheaper for us to buy goods from the French or the Spanish. It was much more profitable for us to sell to the French and Spanish, but the British demanded that we transport everything through Britain or a British port. And these regulations began to become onerous because they were restricting on our profitability and so forth. And as the taxation problem rose, the ability of us to earn a living, to maintain our farms and so forth, we were mostly farmers, became more and more difficult. At one time, backing up, Massachusetts invented paper money. There was no other paper money around at the time. And we did that because we didn't have gold and silver. And gold and silver flowed back to the mother country, couldn't reside here. And at one time, the British just said, I'm sorry, you cannot use paper money anymore. It fluctuates too much, and British merchants are losing a little tad money and so forth. So they said, but also you have to pay your taxes in gold and silver or copper or whatever it was. And we're saying, well, where are we going to get that? It looked as if we were going to lose our farms, that we were going to become simple laborers, and that we were at the service of the mother country. It just began to be so frustrating for us that every time we turned around, there was another British regulation, another British tax, another British imposition and so forth, so that it aroused a spirit in the country here of opposition to British regulation and particularly to British Parliament. We looked to the king for salvation. He was the protector of his people. And when King George III sided with Parliament, that meant we had no one to stand for us. So it turned toward a revolution and independence.
Yeah, I'll just back that up. Even though I'm dressed like this, I must agree that this is a battle of parliaments. The legislatures here in the colonies see themselves as the equivalent of Parliament. Parliament sees it quite differently. And yes, absolutely, for the colonists here, King George had one job. That was to defend them against the machinations of the British Parliament. And when he fails to do that, and he is no longer a king of old, he is now a parliamentary king. And so when he sides with his own party, which is the one creating all of the trouble here, he, in the view of the colonists, he fails in that one great job that he had. And that's when you see the Declaration of Independence. And when you read the Declaration of Independence, which of course post-dates Lexington and Concord by almost a year and a half, it's a list of complaints against George himself. He becomes the issue personified. It's almost like a Dear John letter and the terrible, terrible things that he's done. It's a breakup letter.
I will say too, just to add to that and also backtrack a little bit, when you look at the original embarkation of troops into America in 1768, there are British troops all over the world at that point. And there's a lot of shuffling around that happens to get them into certain places. And so when the 29th and the 14th regiments and then the 64th and the 65th regiments arrive in Boston in 1768, there really is a question, even amongst the leadership in the colony, of whether or not they should be there. You have Royal Governor Bernard going back and forth with General Gage very frequently, talking about, I don't have the authority to ask for you to send troops. I don't know what I have the authority for. I don't even know if they should be here. Not a terribly effective governor. So there is this really interesting dynamic when those troops come to Boston for the first time, and you find a lot of very close, very intimate connections that the soldiers make with the people of Boston. I think that muddies things a lot right off the start. I mean, you have soldiers that are marrying local women, that are having families, that are settling down and finding housing in Boston, that are finding jobs in Boston because they need to support themselves and they can't on a soldier's pay. And so by 1774 and 1775, when they've been here for almost a decade at that point, it's tense. It's a very odd situation, especially right in Boston proper. The soldiers have kind of almost melded into society. And I think that blurs the line between, you know, are we British? Are we something else? Are we thinking about being something else? And so by the time this happens and violence really explodes, there is a gray area. And it's interesting to explore.
It's a very, very messy civil war. Imagine today is if our Army and our National Guard went up against each other and you all had to figure out which side and what to do about it, and your cousin is in the National Guard and your dad is in the Army.
Yeah, you can imagine many of the people that were in Captain Parker's company, including Captain Parker himself, had fought for the British during the French Indian War. So they all considered themselves still very much British. They were not, at that time, thinking, at least some of them weren't, if I take Sam Adams out of it, thinking themselves as separating from the crown. They just wanted to have the same liberties and freedoms that they thought Parliament had denied them.
Yeah, and I'm sorry to keep jumping in, but there's been a few questions about the nature of the militia. I think there's a bit of a myth that the militia were created overnight, sometime on the evening of April 18th. Right. They were not. They'd been here. They were a long-standing European tradition. This is how you raised an army in time of crisis, was through these militias. And most of the British regiments are themselves militia regiments that were put onto what is known as the regular establishment and never taken off.
Yeah, there was a requirement that everyone in Lexington between the ages of 16 and 16 had to participate in the drills, in militia drills.
And this has been going on, right? This has been going on from the moment they got here.
It was called Muster Day, and I have an old cookbook with a recipe for Muster Day gingerbread. Hard enough to slip in your pocket. So if you have to march around for hours in the rain, you can at least have a little gingerbread.
We'll have to make that in camp sometime this year.
There's regular soft gingerbread, and then there's this stuff.
The gingerbread version of hardtack, I suppose.
Yeah.
Right. Well, thank you, everyone. We've had so many amazing questions. Unfortunately, we don't have time for them all. But I think now would be a good time to perhaps get to the third portion of our program. If you are so inclined, Diane, to share some of your wonderful music with us. I think this would be a great time if you're ready.
I am always ready, and at the moment I wake up ready since I have been denied a great many of my usual outlets. In the film First Shot, you saw the women on the green with their spinning wheels making homespun. And they were protesting taxes on paint and glass and tea by being part of a giant boycott of all British goods, one of which was finished cloth. So shortly after that, in 1769, this song appeared, well, the lyrics to this song appeared in the Boston Newsletter anonymously. And it was advising young ladies in town. It's called Young Ladies in Town. The fashionable ladies who are buying ribbons and silk and things from the British to stop doing that. Not only stop doing that and wear homespun, but to refuse offers of marriage from anyone not keeping the boycott. And of course, to stop drinking that imported British tea. Throw away your bohea, they say, which is a black Chinese tea, and your green tea, and instead drink Labrador, which was an herbal tea brewed from an evergreen shrub. I think we've tried it, and it's not quite there. But anyway, here's Young Ladies in Town. Young ladies in town and those that live round, wear none but your own country linen. Of economy boast, let your pride be the most, to show clothes of your own make and spinning. If homespun they say, be not quite as gay as brocades, be not in a passion. For once it is known, 'tis much worn in town, one and all will cry out, 'tis the fashion. And as one agree, you'll not married be to such as will wear London factory. At first sight refuse, pray tell them you'll choose to encourage our own manufactory. No more ribbons wear, nor in rich silks appear. Love your country much better than fine things. Begin without passion, 'twill soon be the fashion to grace your smooth locks with a twine string. Throw away your bouquet and your green hyacinthine and all things of a new fashion duty. Get in a good store of the choice Labrador. There will soon be enough here to suit ye. These do without fear, and to all you'll appear fair, charming, true, lovely, and clever. Though times remain darkish, young men will be sparkish and love you much stronger than ever. Thank you, thank you. Well, in 1770, Dr. Joseph Warren wrote 8 defiant verses advocating rebellion. He was the chair of the Committee of Safety, and he was the fellow who sent Revere and Dawes on their famous warning ride on April 19th. Now, Warren didn't write any music. In fact, he was much more a patriot and doctor than a songwriter, so almost never does anyone sing all the verses he wrote, and people always start with verse 4 because that's the best starting one. But he picked music that would give an extra pinch to the British. He set it to the Britain's proudest marching tune, the British Grenadiers. So here are 3 of his verses. Lift up your hands, ye heroes, and swear with proud disdain. The wretch that would ensnare you shall lay his snares in vain. Should Europe empty all her force, we'll make that in array, and fight and shout and shout and fight for free America. Torn from a world of tyrants beneath this western sky, we formed a new dominion, a land of liberty. The world shall own we're free men here, and such will ever be. Huzzah, 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 huzzah for free America. Some future day shall crown us the masters of the main. Our fleet shall speak in thunder to England, France, and Spain. Nations o'er the ocean spread shall tremble and obey the prince who rules by freedom's laws in North America. And at the time, thank you, at the time we had no navy whatsoever, so his boast that someday the fleets of the greatest powers on earth will tremble at the approach of our scows, of our little fishing dinghies, was quite audacious. Well, here's one in honor of the redcoats among us. The colonial singers welcome all kinds of singers, and we do music from, well, we call it both sides, but really there was only one side for most of the colony's history. Now, this is a great song from Scotland called The Green Plaid or Plaid. The 25th Regiment of Foot, known as the King's Own Scottish Borderers, were stationed in southwest Scotland in the late 1700s. And this song is about their stay among the locals, and it highlights the age-old attraction of a man in uniform. British soldiers in the colonies probably had a similar effect upon unworldly young women dazzled by their shiny boots and romantic promises. So the King's Own offer the girls a role in their plaid, in the long woolly tartan that they used as a blanket or a coat, and which apparently was green. On the 25th of July, Lord Lennoxmen came here, and they dazzled all our lassies' eyes, their armor shone so clear. They dazzled all our lassies' eyes when they met them in the street. But when they met them in the lane, they kissed them so sweet. Will you go along with me, my bonny, bonny lass? And I'll roll you in my green plaid as we lie upon the grass. If I were to go along with you and give to you my hand, your colonel, he would part us before we left the land. Never mind the colonel, he loves you as his life, for he's given to us an order: each man should take a wife. Each man to him a wife, my dear, to keep him right company. And I'll roll you in my green plaid as we sail on the sea. What would me mum and daddy think if they knew I were with thee? Rolling in your green plaid and dangling on your knee. Never mind your mum and dad, or what do you reply? If I had you in Mallorca, 'tis you would drink the wine. You'd drink wine and brandy and keep a bright company. And I'll roll you in my green plaid as we sail upon the sea. Now they've gone to Minorca, and they left the girls behind. Yes, they've gone off to Minorca for the sake of Spanish wine. And some of them were sorry, and some of them right glad. But I wish that I'd run with him, rolled up in his plaid. And if ever they return again, oh, how happy I will be, rolling in his green plaid and dancing on his knee. Oh, those soldiers, those soldiers. Well, here's a great song. I cannot resist this commentary on the course of love, written by a man named John Hippisley for the ballad opera Flora. It debuted in England in 1729 and was one of the first musicals ever performed in America, in Charleston, South Carolina in 1735. And the song remained popular all through the 18th century. And it traces the arc, the natural arc of love as it moves through the seasons. And it does not end well, which we tend to think that, oh, those romantic 18th century people, well, they had a rather clear-eyed view of what usually happens between people. And there's one word in here we don't use much anymore: cloying. Cloying. It means too sweet, too much of a good thing, basically. It's called Sweet is the Budding Spring of Love, and it's only 8 lines. Sweet is the budding spring of love, next blooming hopes all fears remove. And when possessed of beauty's charms, fruition like the summer waves. But pleasures oft repeated cloy, to autumn wanes the fleeting joy, declining till desires are lost, succeeded by eternal frost, succeeded by eternal frost. Happy Valentine's Day. Well, here's a great song also from an English play, which was the place that people got their music from to a great extent here in the colonies. And this one we know of from a musical notebook kept by a captain, a paymaster in the 11th Pennsylvania Regiment all through the war. His name was Captain George Bush, and he was not related to the presidents as he had no living children. But he kept this notebook in which he copied songs from a magazine he subscribed to, which was published in London. And this particular song comes from a London play in 1783, which had the characters of a Highland lad and lassie. And in it, the lad is asking his sweetheart if she will become a camp follower. He is a soldier, and he says, "Can you lie in a barrack and marry a soldier and carry his wallet, his bag with all of his goods in it?" And camp followers are often thought of as just prostitutes, and there were certainly some of those around a military camp. But most of the women there were the wives or daughters of the soldiers, and they did the cooking, they did the laundry, they nursed the wounded, and they received a small wage and a ration of food as well. So in this song, rather casually, he asks her, not only will she come along and carry his wallet, but will she suffer all the privations of being on campaign, starving and freezing? And then he says, will you go into battle? Because frequently the camp followers did help their men right on the battlefield, handing them weapons, bringing them water to drink, and occasionally taking over firing their cannon and weapon, and they became the famous Molly Pitchers of legend. So here is "Oh Say Bonnie Lass." Oh, say Bonnie lass, can you lie in a barrack and marry a soldier and carry his wallet? Oh, say, will you leave both your mammy and daddy and follow to the camp with your soldier laddie? Oh, yes, I will do it and think nothing of it. I'll marry my soldier and carry his wallet. Oh, yes, I will leave both my mammy and daddy and follow to the camp with my soldier laddie. Oh, say, Bonnie lass, will you go a-campaigning, endure all the hardship of cannon and battle? When I'm wounded and bleeding, then wilt thou draw near me and kindly support me and tenderly cheer me? Oh, say, Bonnie lass, will you go into battle where drums are beating and cannons loud rattle? Oh, yes, my dear lad, I will share all thy harms, and should thou be killed, I will die in thine arms. Thank you. Of course, it's from a dramatic play, so she has to expire if he happens to expire. There's no going on for the Left Behind. Well, I have a couple more. Is that okay? Can we continue? I suppose if people need to go make lunch or feed the baby or whatever, they can go do that. This is a song, the colonial singers were just about to make a recording when the whole world ground to a complete halt. And we do hope to get back to it eventually. And this was one of the songs we were going to do. We will do it. I am confirmed in my determination. This was a popular song in the Revolutionary era. Say that 10 times. Katie Cruel. It's probably of Scottish origin, as the first verse is a lot like an old Scots song. And the last verse was lifted whole from an older English song. It's got this wonderfully convoluted chorus, and we're not sure what the story is behind this, but it has wonderful images. So here's Katie Cruel. Excuse me while I wet me whistle. When I first came to town, they called me the roving jewel. Now they've changed their tune. They call me Katie Cruel. Oh, little lily day. Oh, da little day. Oh, that I was where I would be, then should I be where I am not. Here am I where I must be, where I would be I cannot. Oh, little lily day. Oh, da little day. When I first came to town, they brought, I already did that. No. Oh well. Eyes as black as coal, lips as red as a cherry, and 'tis her delight to make the young folks merry. Oh, little lily day. Oh, little day. Oh, that I was where I would be, then should I be where I am not. Here am I where I must be, where I would be I cannot. Oh, little lily day, oh, little day. When I first came to town, they brought me the bottles plenty. Now they've changed their tune. They bring me the bottles empty. Oh, little lily day, oh, little day. Oh, that I was where I would be, then should I be where I am not. Here am I where I must be, where I would be I cannot. Oh, little lily day, oh, little day. Through the woods I'll go, and through the boggy mire, straight way down the road till I come to my heart's desire. Oh, little lily day, oh, little day. I know who I love, and I know who loves me. I know where I'll go, and I know who'll go with me. Oh, little lily day, oh, little day. Oh, that I was where I would be, then should I be where I am not. Here am I where I must be, where I would be I cannot. Oh, little lily day, oh, little day. Thank you. And when we finally record that, Paul can attest to this. There will be harmonies. It will be glorious. All right, I think I'll do you one more. Does that seem good? Yes? No? Is there anyone in charge?
Did we lose Sarah? Right.
Oh,
there you are.
About Zoom events. It's unclear when they begin, and it's hard to end them too. So this last one is also from Captain Bush's notebook, and it's called "Saw You My Hero, George." And I haven't brought this to the singers yet, but I plan to, because it's a great song. I mean, George might be George Washington or just any old George, but someone is searching for him. Saw you my hero, saw you my hero, saw you my hero, George. I've roamed through all the plain, and I've asked every swain for some news of my hero, George. I saw not your hero, I saw not your hero, I saw not your hero, George.
Your heroes in the van of the battle just began, and I to my men must away. Hark from the hills, the woodlands and dales, the drums and the trumpet alarms. Ye gods, I give you charge of my gallant hero George, to return him unhurt to my arms. Saw you my hero, saw you my hero, saw you my hero George. I've run through all the plain and I've asked of every swain for some news of my hero George.
Thank you. Any questions? It's too small for me to read. If there were questions, Sarah could read them to me.
Yes, I didn't see any music specific ones, but if anyone has any, we can certainly take a couple.
Music or otherwise.
Well, I know that a couple people were asking, and I believe we sent some messages to the group, but this might be a good time for us to maybe give a brief description of if anyone would like to join any of these groups, how would they do so?
Yeah, I can take that for the Minutemen. As far as that's concerned, we do have a website. It's lexingtonminutemen.org, or just Google Lexington Minutemen and go to our website. And there is a specific link on that to if you want to become a member. Basically, what will happen is you'll contact our membership chairman. He will interview you and find out what your interests are and pretty much give you an idea about what the requirements are. A lot of people have asked whether you needed to be in Lexington or whether you needed to have a relative who served in the Revolutionary War. That is not true. It obviously helps if you live a little bit closer, because a lot of our activities do take place in town and nearby. But there is no requirement that you live nearby. We have members that live in Maine. We have members that live in Connecticut. We have members all throughout New England. So please, we're always looking for new members who are interested in the history and interested in honoring, as we do every April 19th, those heroes that led to the birth of our nation. So again, go to our website and you'll find it there. Paul, I think you'll have another information if they want to become a British regular.
Well, if you'd like to help out the government in this desperate effort to maintain law and order in these colonies, we have a website also, redcoat.org. Yes, we grabbed that one pretty early. That one's specific to the 10th Regiment, but there are others, and we have links to some other regiments. There's also, for those who are not in New England or nearby, there is the British Brigade, and you can look that up. And there are links to all of these regiments. So there are a number of them, but specifically in and around Boston, redcoat.org is the 10th Regiment of Foot, and it's a recreated regiment as it would have appeared in 1775, garrisoned in Boston. And again, there's a link there to joining or putting in an application. It does require perhaps an unusual amount of commitment, and it's the musket and the weapons and the uniforms are not without some expense. But if you are interested in getting involved in this, we can definitely promise you the best seat in the house on April 19th.
And think of your effect upon women. I mean, there's nothing like a man in uniform.
Oh, well.
That's the reason why I joined. To
What can I say?
If you want to be a villain, yes, join a redcoat.
It's always, any actor will tell you, it's always more fun to play a bad guy.
To play a villain. You're absolutely right, Paul.
And just
But Paul, you play it very, very well, I've got to say. And from the colonial side, the regulars are terrific. Their personification and the way they portray is fantastic. And without them, we wouldn't have anyone to shoot at.
No, and it's true. I have to admit that the Redcoats put on the better show that day, and they have the better looking uniforms as well.
True. And we have the China for it too.
Just to add to that a little bit, it's speaking in more general terms, if there's anyone out there who is interested in learning history, one of the things that I was told very early on and has helped me a lot is to really think about your own day-to-day life and your own interests and figure out how you can translate those into a past persona. So in my day-to-day life, I work in retail. I sell really expensive purses. I'm into clothing and fashion and that sort of thing. And so clothing has been a big research interest of mine. But I also have a pretty busy day-to-day life too. So getting into this as a hobby was a big commitment. It is a lot to think. The uniform, and I did the soldier thing for a while, and then decided I wanted to do a little bit more with civilian activities and with women. So currently researching women who served as nurses. So there's something for everybody in this hobby, which is really, I think, the best part of it. And we're all good friends. We might shoot each other on April 19th every year, but we're all good friends.
I don't like Bill.
Paul.
And if you would like to learn some colonial era music, the colonial singers have almost no requirements for being a member. Our goal is to present music sung by ordinary people back then, and we excel at that. So we're interested in ordinary sounding singers. And the only real requirement is when we perform, we are in period attire, but we can help you out with that happily. And we rehearse on Monday evenings when the weather is good and we feel like it. And you can come to rehearsals when you feel like it and when you have time. We have people from Lexington and Woburn and surrounding areas. We have all ages. Our oldest member, I believe, is 86 at this point, and we have some younger folks as well. We have men, we have women, and we have a couple of those redcoats as well. So we had more. We lost one, but we have one now who's holding up his end very, very well. So to get in touch with the group and find out more about it, you would contact me, and either at diane@dianeterez.com, or you can find me through the Lexington Historical Society website as well. There's a page on the singers. I think my email's in there. Or just send an email to them and they'll send it to me, and we'll figure it all out. And we perform irregularly a few times a year at various events. It's a lot of fun and very little pressure.
Very fun. And someone is also curious where you found all of these songs.
Well, they were writing things down back then. And due to the magic of Google digitizing books and documents, not only can you find these songs in collections that were created perhaps in the Victorian era, where they might have been squeamish about putting in original words that seemed to them a bit inelegant or graceless, you can find the first time it was printed down with all the mistakes and perhaps rude words that you might like. And those are called primary sources that haven't been filtered through someone else's editing. And through the magic of the computer, I can look at these old books in dusty libraries all over the world. And of course, it helps that people have collected them into collections as well. There's a lot of it out there, and especially since a lot of it came from plays. The colonial singers a couple times have put on the Beggar's Opera, which was just tremendous fun and had 60 songs in it, which I've pared down to just 22. And so they were all, written down in this, and of course it's 250-year-old notation, which is a little different, and all their S's look like F's, or is it F's look like S? Yeah, S's look like it. I mean, you have to scope things out, but there's a lot of ways to find this music. It's like any other history.
All right, wonderful. And we did have another one. What is your musical background?
Erratic. When you go to the Boston Symphony and you read the program and it says that the soloist was born to a musical family in Vienna. I was born to tone-deaf parents in Pittsfield. They weren't completely tone deaf, but I learned to sing in my church choirs and my school choirs and choruses and whatnot, and just kept going that way. And then in high school, I discovered a book called 100 English Folk Songs, most of which I could not understand until I learned a lot more about history. Because the songs always start right in the middle and they don't explain who anybody is or why they're doing the strange things that they're doing. And I have always been very taken with melody. Just the beauty and energy of old melodies is just amazing. And the complexity of old music, back when people had a lot more time to spend, and part of your education, male and female, was musical. You learned to carry yourself, to dance and to sing, and to know how to do music in a way that we don't do much. And we've turned it over to the professionals now, sort of, whereas back then everyone sang all the time, doing everything they could think of. So I have a degree in elementary education, and I have a master's degree in communication. And if I'm looking back from this distance, I educate and communicate, not quite in the way I thought I would. And I do a lot of different things, not just the historical music. So you can go to my website at dianeterez.com and see all the things that I get up to. I write music. I've done a couple of albums of jazz standards with a big band, and just lots and lots of fun. I sing Renaissance polyphony with a group. So dianeterez.com. The nice thing about a website is you could just put everything's on there. You can spend days on my website reading about my early childhood in the Berkshires all the way up to my latest recordings. And I think has it been 10 years now with the Colonial Singers? I think so. The previous executive director, Susan Bennett. Yes, it was her idea. She went to Williamsburg and saw some people in period attire singing songs. She said, oh, we could do that. Let's see, who could I get to start this group? So we started rehearsing Monday nights in February. The first rehearsal, 3 people showed up, and the next rehearsal, 2 people showed up. I said, this isn't gonna go. But gradually, over the years, we just keep going, and we now have about 15 with a few extras who come for various events, 20 sometimes. And our next, we have made 1 recording, which I think we've sold them all. We need to order some more. And we will make this next recording. We will, someday. I don't know what day, but someday.
Yes. I have faith it will happen. All right, well, I think we have exhausted all of our questions at this point.
Everybody's hungry.
Yeah, I think it's about time for a lunch break. So I'd just like to thank all of our reenactors and Diane for being here with us today. And thank you to everyone who has been listening. Our next program today is going to be at 3 p.m. We are going to be having a talk with Joel Bowie and Chris Fox, who are historians and sometimes ballistics experts, who will be explaining a little bit of some of their recent research on the damage that was sustained in some of the homes along the Battle Road on April 19th. And they've been exploring a lot of bullet holes here in Buckman Tavern and also at the Jason Russell House and other places. So that should be a fun time as well. And then we'll have events happening over the course of the week. So just go ahead, if you'd like, to lexingtonhistory.org to get some more calendars. All right, so thank you all so much to our reenactors and to our visitors, and we hope you enjoyed the rest of your Patriots Day.
I'm very curious, how many people did we have attending?
I counted 92 at the highest.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Goodbye, Paul.
Thanks, everyone. I love you, Bill.
Thank you.
See you next year.
Happy family.
Bye, Diane.
Bye, Diane.
Bye-bye.
Oh my goodness.